This is Shalom World Podcast.
Welcome to Voyage. I am your host, Frances Hogan. Welcome to our sharing on St. John's Gospel. And I want to continue talking to you about John chapter 9, the healing of the man who was born blind. I shared with you the last time that this man actually represents us. He represents all of us who will be baptized in water and the Spirit, and therefore he represents everyone who will come to Jesus for life. And so when you go back to the earlier chapters and you hear Jesus saying that he wants to bring people from death to life, as he did in chapter 5. He wants to offer the water of life, as he did in chapter 4 and in chapter 7. Then you realize that this man actually represents us. So you'll notice that when John is giving you his gospel, he isn't just telling you a surface story. Each person that he has chosen to reveal the mystery of Jesus on, that person represented somebody or some group or all of us, or they can represent all of us at a certain particular stage. I also told you that healing the man physically was only the beginning of the real journey that this man had to take from darkness to the light. And we began the journey that he had to take in order to really discover that Jesus is the light of the world. It's one thing to open your eyes and to see a young man in front of you. It's quite another matter to say, my Lord and my God. Totally different. And so the first stage of this man's journey was simply to recognize Jesus as the man. That's where everybody starts. And they've got to move from there. And it was when the Pharisees began to put pressure on him to say where his sight came from, he began to realize that Jesus was a prophet. So this is the next stage of his journey. And then the Pharisees put him on trial and they force him to tell the story over and over again. Now, it may seem strange to you that this man is being asked to testify over and over and over again. But at the end of this sharing, I will show you that this actually reflects what was going on in the early church. The Jewish people were saying to the new Christians, but what is this new life? How can you see? Tell us about it. And it gave the Christians the opportunity to actually testify as to what it meant to come to Christ. And so they would have to tell their testimony over and over and over again in the hope that their listeners would actually open up to come to Christ. So then we came to step 3, where the leadership had put this man under oath to speak the truth as to where he got his eyesight from. And we have a phenomenon that is utterly amazing here. And that is that an ordinary layman who has never been in the temple before because he was both poor and blind, he stands up to the Jewish leadership and he challenges them. Now, that is very important as well, and I'll explain that later to you. Okay? So he has the audacity to say to the Jewish leadership, do you want to become his disciples? Now, when you go into the Acts of the Apostles, you will see and hear Peter and James and John and the other apostles. You'll witness them standing up to the Jewish Sanhedrin and saying, it is better for us to listen to God rather than you. And the Sanhedrin are utterly amazed that these Galilean fishermen, who in their eyes know nothing, are talking to them with authority. And they're looking more and more and more like Jesus every day. And the complete shock that they have is reflected here. That the leadership cannot understand that the laity would stand up to them. And so I want to begin at verse 29. You can be his disciples, they said. We are disciples of Moses. Oh dear. That brings you back to the discussions we've had in chapters 7 and 8, where Jesus told them, you say you are disciples of Moses, but you don't keep the law. And if you are a disciple of Moses, you must keep the law. That's the logic. What is being reflected here, of course, is that you have become an apostate. You've become a heretic. We have remained faithful to the old religion. And then they throw at this man whom they say, you'll remember this from chapters beforehand, they said that rabble knows nothing, they're damned. And so what you find is that this man begins to theologize in front of them. Now, they didn't think that the laity were capable of theologizing about anything. They didn't think the laity could have a discussion about religion. But Jesus has proved to us back in chapter 4 that not only can the laity, as in the men, do it. We saw a woman enter into a theological debate with Jesus. And in their eyes, she was a heretic and she was a write-off. So the Jewish leadership are getting shock after shock because they are seeing that the ordinary people are different to the way they were before. They're no longer passive. They have the courage to stand up to them. And the ordinary people seem to know God personally, and they are able to defend their faith. And this is a complete shock to them. They've never met this before. So the leadership then retort to the man. They said, as for this man, in other words, the one who healed you, we don't even know where he comes from. This is terribly important. The man replied, now this is an astonishing thing, he said. He has opened my eyes and you don't know where he comes from. Everybody knew that when the Messiah came, there would be a mystery about his birth, that nobody would know where he came from. And that's precisely the situation we have with Jesus. And while the leadership know theoretically that that is true about the Messiah, they're just not accepting this particular Messiah. Thank you. They've already decided they don't like him for all kinds of reasons that we've dealt with before. So the man said, now here is an astonishing thing. He has opened my eyes and you don't know where he comes from. We know, oh dear, this is a layman speaking. The last time we heard the big we know was in chapter 3, where Nicodemus told the layman Jesus that we know, that is the Sanhedrin knows, that you are a prophet from God because you give all the signs. What is this lay thing? Where the laity are saying, we know. So suddenly these lay people have an authority that the Jewish elders have never seen before. We know, the man said, that God doesn't listen to sinners. A sinner is somebody who is actively in rebellion against God. But God does listen to men who are devout and do his will. Ever since the world began, it's unheard of for a man to open the eyes of someone who was born blind. In other words, there had been healings before, but this type of healing, this is off the Richter scale. This has never happened before. And because it is something that never happened before, surely even you, the leadership, can see that this is something that comes from God. This is step 4. It would have been utterly and completely astounding for the leadership to hear an ordinary, in their eyes, uneducated layman able to stand his ground before them, work out theologically his position, and be completely logical and scripturally correct. This is completely new, but that was the reality in the early church. That was the reality that they had to face, that the lay people actually knew who they were and why they were. And they knew who had given them the new life, and they knew how to enter into the new life. They were studying the scriptures. They had looked up all the scriptures about Jesus. They knew. And so this is an amazing thing for the Jewish leadership. And so he comes to a conclusion. all by himself, no help from these false shepherds. He said, if this man were not from God, he couldn't do a thing. So what you have seen in this journey of this layman is that he is journeying into the light. He is journeying into a complete security in God. He's completely sure of his ground. And the thing is, he has never seen Jesus, because he was totally blind when Jesus said, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. I went and I washed and I saw. All he knew was that the name of the person was Jesus. He has yet to look Jesus in the face. It's really incredible. At this particular point, the leadership show that they really are false prophets. They really are. They replied, are you trying to teach us? You see, they've always been on the high platform before. The laity always listened passively to them. They were the ones who laid down the law, as we would say. And here was a completely new phenomenon, that the laity knew exactly what ground they were standing on. They could defend their position. They knew the scriptures. They knew who Jesus was. And also, they wanted the leadership to come over to Jesus. Now, I'm going to make a big jump. Did any of the laity succeed in getting any of these men to come over to Jesus? And the answer is yes. There's one small little sentence in Acts chapter 6. It's not even a complete sentence, but it's one of the most astounding sentences in the New Testament, considering the opposition that these men gave to Jesus. It says, a large number of priests became followers of Jesus. So this debate that's going on here between this layman and the leadership is not something that's not going to bear fruit. It will bear fruit. They won't all come over. But if a large number of them came over, then Jesus won a great harvest. Can't you see that when Jesus insisted on dealing with the woman of Samaria correctly, a wonderful harvest came from Samaria? When he dealt with the father of the little boy who was dying correctly, there was a great harvest in that household. And here, taking this man out of absolute obscurity, nobody would ever have looked at this man before, because after all, he was just a blind beggar. You throw a few coins at him and walk on, you don't really look. Jesus has taken this man out of absolute nothingness and raised him up. There is a psalm which says, he has raised the poor from the dust and put them sitting with princes. Because the princes of my people mentioned in that psalm are the leadership. And this is what you're looking at here. Somebody taken out of nothing. And here he is speaking authoritatively to the leadership. You then begin to look at the enormity of the miracle that has happened in this man's life. Just the sheer gigantic size of the miracle. The greater miracle was in his heart. It was in his innermost being. It is the fact that he was transformed. It wasn't just the fact that he could see with his eyes. Because seeing with your eyes is still on the level of the flesh. That wouldn't be the great thing. But seeing this utterly transformed human being, yes, that's the miracle. That's the real thing. And so they said, are you trying to teach us? And you a sinner through and through from the day you were born. What a judgment. Do you remember the beginning of the story? Who is to blame? Who is guilty? This man or his parents, that he was born blind? And you have the leadership saying that he has been a sinner since the day he was born, and therefore he is guilty because he's blind? Have you ever heard of injustice? Have you ever heard of a wrong judgment? This is it. It's absolutely amazing. So let me see, have I any more thoughts written down here for you so that we get the most out of this wonderful thing. Let's look at this layman standing up to the leadership. So the man keeps on repeating the message. He answers every criticism and every accusation with a testimony. That's one of the ways that this man is a model for us. This man is a model for us on many levels, but that's one of the ways. And so he is a model for us in showing us also that we should grow interiorly and become fearless witnesses for Christ. He has become a fearless witness for Christ. No matter what pressure is put on him, he will testify to his Lord and Saviour. That makes him a real model for us. So no matter what the world says to us, no matter what pressure governments or anybody else puts on us, we testify to the truth. We don't do it angrily. This man is very calm. We just give them the truth. We simply follow Jesus, that when pressure was put on him, he remained calm and recollected, and he gave them the truth regardless of the cost. Okay. Now, when we're told in verse 34 that the leaders drove him out and that they gave him this very, very unjust judgment, I want to remind you of John chapter 8 that we've just come through, that sinners should not judge sinners. They're accusing this man of being a sinner and of being a sinner from the day he was born. But since they're not keeping the law, and they're not certainly keeping the law of love, they've no love for anybody. They are sinners judging sinners, and that is not allowed. Jesus says that if you have to give judgment, your judgment must be sound. It must not be on the basis of prejudice and hatred, which is what is happening here. You remember Matthew 15:14, that they were blind leaders and they were leading people into the ditch, the blind leading the blind. Well, that's them. So now the man is thrown out of the synagogue. So what happens? Let's pick up at verse 35. Jesus heard that the man had been driven away and, of course, went looking for him. Why? Because Jesus is the shepherd of the sheep, as we're going to hear very soon. And when Jesus found him, you get a wonderful dialogue between this man who can now see, not only with his physical eyes, but see with his interior eyes. Jesus found him and he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" So Jesus is using the expression that points to the vision of Daniel in Daniel 7:13-14. That's the Son of Man who will reign with an eternal reign. So therefore, that the Messiah is not a material king with a material kingdom and a material army. That's not the reality. That's the level of below. But that the kingdom of God belongs to God's realm. And so he says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And this healed man said, "Kyrie, Lord, tell me who he is and I will believe in him." Now there's a very wonderful thing that is being told to us here. Jesus is the good shepherd. We're going to hear that very, very soon. He went looking for his sheep who was lost in this crowd that wasn't going to do him any good because he has been completely judged, okay, and judged wrongly by them. And Jesus wants to complete the healing by bringing him fully and completely into the light. So he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, this man has received so much grace. He has received so much through Jesus. That you remember at the beginning of this thing, people were saying, yes, he's the man. He looks like him, but something has happened to him. Well, if you look at him now, he has the same physical features outside. Isn't he transformed? He's completely different. He has received so much. So because he has received so much, he trusts Jesus to tell him the truth. This is the position of all disciples. And this is the position of all who put their faith in Jesus. We trust him to actually give us the truth. And so he said, Lord, tell me who he is, and I will believe. So his soul is completely open to the truth. It's very beautiful to see it. And Jesus said something absolutely amazing. He said, you're looking at him. I am he. It's totally amazing. Your Messiah, your Lord, your Shepherd, your King, your God. You're looking at him. And so this is the seeing that you find in Psalm 36 verse 9. Lord, with you there is a fountain of life, and in your light we see light. So what is happening here is that this man is looking into the eyes of Jesus, and looking into the eyes of Jesus, he can see the truth. What John is telling you and me is that we look into the eyes of Jesus in prayer. We open our interior eyes to Jesus in prayer. And when we do, we too will see the truth. We will know the truth. It's a wonderful thing. And so the man said, Lord, I believe, and worshipped him. Now, this is the highest point of anybody responding to Jesus so far in this gospel. There's only two people who fell at the feet of Jesus and worshipped him, this man and Thomas, after the resurrection, nobody else. And so to reach this point of actually worshipping Jesus means he has come fully and totally into the truth. It's really fantastic. You are looking at him. The man opened his eyes to the presence of the great I am, because we've been talking about that all the time. He's looking at the giver of new life. He's looking at the source of living water. He's looking at the God of Israel in human flesh. No wonder he would worship him, because he was a true believer. If you remember that wonderful text from Isaiah chapter 12, this man can now drink deeply from the well of salvation. He has opened up completely. And so this nobody has become a very big somebody in the eyes of God. He has become a child of God. He has become an inheritor for the kingdom of God. Okay. And you remember that Jesus said in those controversies from chapter 6 to chapter 8 that whoever the Father gives me, I will accept, and I will raise him up on the last day. What a wonderful future this man has. The reaction to this is very, very interesting. The scribes and Pharisees are present when Jesus finds the man. Okay, so this is verses 39 to 41. Jesus said, "It is for judgment that I have come into the world, so that those without sight may see, and those with sight become blind." The man has come from blindness to sight. The leadership are going from sight to blindness. There's two completely different opposite journeys happening here. The Pharisees understood everything that Jesus said. They were the scripture scholars. They knew. And they said to him, "We're not blind, surely?" Jesus said, "Blind? If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty." Oh, there's Jesus' answer to the very beginning. This man is born blind. Who is guilty? Jesus said, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty. But since you claim to see, your blindness remains. So let me give you another way of reading this particular text, because it's actually very important. Okay. What John is doing here is giving you a double take. Do you remember I said in chapter 6 that when John was giving us chapter 6 that he was also superimposing the Christian Eucharist on top of it? Well, in this particular case, what John is doing is he's superimposing what is going on in the early church onto this particular text. So there's a lot about baptism and coming into the church in this particular text. So you have two stages of history here, what's going on at the time of Christ and what's going on at the time of John. And when you go back to the time of Christ, there were no expulsions from the synagogue. The expulsions from the synagogue only happened at the time of the early church. When the church began to separate from the synagogue, the church began to realize it couldn't stay in the synagogue. But if you look at Acts chapter 1 to chapter 5, you will find that the very earliest days of the church, they did go to the temple and they did participate in the feasts until the persecution of the Sanhedrin drove them all out of the land. They had to go and disperse. And so when they meet the Jews, the Jewish people in all the different areas that they disperse to, these discussions and disputes set up. You'll see that if you look at all the travels of St. Paul in the Acts of the Apostles, how he was opposed by the Jews of the diaspora and how he was accepted by the Gentiles. What you have here in this text is that some Christians were able to boldly proclaim the Christ. There were others, like the parents of this man, who wanted to stay in the synagogue and still be Christian. And so they opted out of these discussions, and that's where the parents come in this particular story. And what John is saying to them is, you lose nothing by going over to Christ. In fact, you gain everything. And so he's trying to encourage the early Christians to step out, no matter what opposition is there, and to bear witness to Christ.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World Podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.